So I'm just going to run it again and just quickly throw in my little image plane. So usually if I'm doing weapons, so the one thing that I always look for if I'm seeing people making like axes or stuff like that is like, I want the tip to actually be pointy. That is like one of the things that I do actively look for. What did I just save that as? Where did I save it? Oh, I saved it in Minitown. Okay. Sorry. Buster. All right. So I'm just going to rotate this so that it is actually facing sort of straight. Close enough. All right, so normally when I'm doing weapons, I do kind of a weird thing where I just end up starting with like a plane, because planes are life apparently, but I'll usually go in and block out, like on most weapons there's like a flat part, or like the non-blade part, whatever curvature or shape that has. So again, I'll just go in, throw in a quick plane, extrude that up. Hello. And this is kind of where I start going like a little bit low poly with things. So I'm actually just gonna I'll just take this vert and just delete it. And you can see that now I have basically like a little sad block of geometry that is sort of defining the main non-blade part of this giant human-sized blade. So at that point, what I do is usually take the edge, this little edge here, and just extrude that out. Half the time I just pull it out in a random direction or just like straight to the side. And I'll just line that up with the side of the blade. Grab the vert at the top and delete it. So you can see that now I have like pretty much a super low poly version of this blade. And in this case, it was actually probably kind of dumb of me to delete this. So what I'm actually going to do is just like pull it up like super crazy close to this vert up here, like not quite touching it, but like almost touching it. And the reason for that is going to hopefully make sense in a few seconds. Shift this back. So at this point, pretty much what I'm going to do, I have this like flat blade blocking out where my stuff is supposed to be. I'm just going to take the non-blade section of the blade and just move it out slightly. And you can see that what this gives me is like pretty much most of the time this will give you like a fairly reasonable looking little like bevel for the side of the blade. So if I duplicate this and scale it on the, negative Z, you can see that now I have like kind of a very awkward little like pointy blade shape thing. So I'm gonna do the same thing I did with the plushie, where I'm just gonna mesh combine these dudes, and I need to actually connect the center vertices together, because they're, as you can see, not actually connected. So I'm just gonna select the whole object and do edit mesh merge. And that should usually, especially on stuff like this, it'll do a really nice job of just sort of attaching stuff together on the sides. You'll notice that like this doesn't have, a back or a bottom, but that's not something we're gonna worry about yet. So normally, for me, like the hardest thing, and I haven't spent a lot of time like actually studying this sword, so I, strictly speaking, don't know exactly what it's supposed to look like.
It's a really hard edge, like super hard edge.
Yes, it looks like this would just be like a giant flat, like basically thick piece of steel.
It's like a stick of like steel or whatever.
Okay. See, I can never find pictures of the back side of it. Like that's always the thing for me. So I think half the challenge of like doing blades, like you'll notice like this one, it actually shows you like how they choose to like deal with that edge or like that hard area. But like the worst part of doing blades for me is always like, I mean, this is like, okay, cool. So you have like, a thick piece of whatever, and then you have like this little spiky blade area here, and that's fine. But then like right when you get to the top, it just gets like really thick and awkward, and like this doesn't look particularly dangerous. So you could either, take this and just like pull it in. I should probably turn symmetry back on. You could like squish this in, but then it's also sort of, cropping like this side of the sword. So I feel like kind of how you guys decide to handle that is largely up to you, and like depends a lot on what you're actually making. In this case, I'm probably just going to leave this like it is for the sake of the demo, and then just kind of keep going. So I'm going to bridge these guys together with one extra division. And then rather than, I want these to connect together, so I'm just gonna take this vertice, hold down D and V at the same time, so D is, actually no, sorry, not D and V. Just hold down V. I just want to take this vertice and physically shift it up to this other one. By holding V, it turns on vertex snapping. So it'll just move it up, pretty much attach it directly on top of that other one, at which point I can select both of them and merge them to center. So now if I smooth this, I have a lovely blob of a blade-shaped thing. So this is usually like, if I was happy with the shape of this blade, this is like honestly usually where I would end up leaving this for like a low poly model. This is also usually the point where like if I was going to texture it, I would do it now. Because any of the edge loops and stuff that I add in later aren't really going to affect the UVs that I have on this. And I personally just think it's a lot easier to UV this than it is to UV something with like 50 edge loops in it. So I'm going to just duplicate this really quick and show you guys how I would make a high poly version of this. And it basically is just adding in a bunch of extra edge loops into this until it behaves the way that you want, which is not like this. So first thing I'm going to do, just throw in an edge loop tool, and I'm like, I kind of just want the blade to be pointy. That'll make me happy. So I'm going to throw in one loop on for like the edge of the blade, one little loop in here, and you can see that now my blade is kind of pointier. It would still be good if I had like one more loop in here. And you can see that now at least I have some semblance of like a defined line for that sharp area. But you will notice like this little edge I just tried to add, it stops right here, and that's like whenever you add tries, a lot of times you'll have to like manually reroute your edge loops. So in this case, I'm just going to go into my multi-cut tool and continue this down the rest of the blade area like such. I think I might have missed a loop. Yeah, cool. When symmetry goes horribly wrong. All right, well that's not special anymore, but whatever. So again, defined little blade area thing. This will actually be, heaven help me, I'm going to turn these into a blend because it'll make it easier to see what's happening. Theoretically. But yeah, so I mean you can see that like nice crease in there. And then obviously fixing this area so it's pointy would be greatly beneficial to the model. So I can get the edge loop on the bottom here, but because of those tries, you can see that it's not letting me draw all the way across this area here. Quickest dumb fix for that, and this is like something, again, that I think I mentioned this before, but this is like something I only recommend doing if you're paying attention to your model, is just using multi-cut tool, and if you click outside of your model, hold down shift, you can drag straight across your model and just chop an edge loop into it. Which again, can totally, like, multi-cut tool does not care about n-gons. So do this with caution, but in this case, since I know it's just failing because of a single try there, I can just, again, chop straight across my model, and it's pretty much going to throw in all the edge loops I need. And now I have something that, save for this weird edge bit that it skipped. Interesting. It's smoothing much nicer. I feel like Maya's about to crash on me. It's getting kind of weird. All right, so missed this little end area. I'm not entirely sure why. Just gonna drag that in, be like, yay. So you can see that now it's like actually pointy. And if I wanted to, I could do the same thing to this top area here and just sort of multi-cut in. So again, multi-cut tool, click outside your mesh, hold down shift, drag straight across. It's just gonna chop through your model. And that helps to harden out the top area there. I've also, it looks like, done some weird stuff to this model, where like added extra edge loops in here that I'm not really sure what they're doing. But that's like more or less how I turn blades from like low poly to high poly. And I definitely have some pretty messed up geometry up here, but it's gonna kind of ignore that for now. So any questions on this so far? All right. If I did want to punch holes in this, so So I'm not gonna lie, if I was doing like a low poly model, and I wanted these like weird, wait, why do some of these have holes and some of them not have holes? What? Okay, anyway, oh, it was screws? Okay. Clearly I'm like very not familiar with like the simplest sword in this game. Like this one has, okay, anyway. If you wanted holes in this, if you were doing this as a low poly model, or like doing this, for 3D printing or whatever, probably my go-to thing would honestly just be, hey, I'm gonna make some cylinders. They're gonna be amazing, and yup, I'm just gonna Boolean these suckers in. Yeah, no, it's gonna be gross. So what I'm gonna do to make this slightly less horrible, maybe, I'm just gonna throw in like a few edge loops in the vicinity of, what are you doing right now? Oh no. Ah. Oh, if you ever are like, oh my god, where are all my menus? Just scroll in this bar.
Yeah.
It'll.
On one of them occasions.
Yeah, right? The first time that happened to me, like 6 months ago. Yeah, I did too. I restarted my computer. I'm like, oh my god, I've broken. And then I like accidentally scrolled and I'm like, oh, my buttons are back. But yeah, so I'm just gonna throw in 1 or 2 more edge loops sort of around these holes. Because when I clean up this mesh, it's gonna just sort of help with being less gross. So I'm gonna select my sword, select my cylinder, mesh, booleans, difference. I now have a hole in my sword and a bajillion n-gons. So I'm gonna do that again. If you hand me a model in without these cleaned up, like with these ginormous n-gons here.
I've done that. No, it was on the bottle. It was awful.
But yeah, I'll cry inside. And also, again, maybe outside. So if you're going to Boolean your low poly mesh, what I would recommend doing is then going and doing a mesh cleanup on any faces with more than 4 sides, and half the time it'll remove your texture. What am I doing? It did, yeah, sometimes Booleans do weird stuff to your textures, but you should much need to like reassign it. But you can see that it has, at least at a bare minimum, it's now tries. And again, this is usually why I recommend like don't Boolean stuff if you need to smooth it, because it looks like trash. However, if you're not smoothing it and you've gotten rid of the n-gons, this would be a perfectly serviceable game mesh. It might not be a horrible idea to like go in. Sometimes the thing does a little weird, like this is stretching pretty aggressively. Like if it were me, I'd probably just delete that and like redraw it in. Or you can just delete it and apparently it leaves a quad there. And then like same thing down here, where like this is just, it's just stretching way more than I personally like. So I'm just gonna get rid of both of these and just like redraw this in down like that. And it's just, again, a little bit less weirdly aggressive. So again, this is for if you are doing a game mesh, totally can leave it like this. If you are doing not a game mesh, I'm probably just going to like model these in like a real person, I guess. Gross. And depending, I guess this is like a relatively simple sword shape. So I'm just gonna throw in some n-gons. I'm gonna throw in some edge loops here. And you can probably, hopefully you guys are gonna see where this is going, where I'm pretty much just gonna like delete some faces and circularize said faces. Oops. I'm doing Control 1 to isolate select, because it's like my favorite tool ever. So I'm just gonna grab these and, yes, I see. I haven't put the edge loops on the other side of my model. Cough. All right. All right, screw it. Improvisation. All right, so I'm just gonna punch some awkward like fake holes in this. So I'm just gonna delete those faces. And grab this, circularize, grab this, circularize. At which point I can then take these and like scale them down to be whatever size I needed. So in this case, I did have them kind of centered where I wanted them. You'll notice if I scale them like this, they go really off where I was hoping they'd be. If I go into my tool settings for scale and I set axis orientation to component, that's not what I wanted. It should, 80% of the time, this works better. Normally what it would do is it would actually scale these both separately. Again, not entirely sure why it's not doing that this time. Honestly, it should be. What are you doing?
Something else selected?
No. I mean, usually if that happens, something else usually is selected. But in this case, I just don't know what the heck it's doing. For grins, because I'm kind of salty at the tool now. Yeah, like these are both working totally fine. I don't know why it's complaining about those particular edge loops. Anyway, so I'm just gonna kind of like use these as a just hide those. So at this point, again, I have my weird little holes. If I wanted to, if I actually had matching holes on the other sides of this, other side of this mesh, I would just bridge across them and add whatever edge loops I needed. In this case, I'm just going to assume that there's like a weird little like button-shaped indent in this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just take those little circles, or those edge loops that I have selected, and extrude straight inwards. So just like this. This is going to give me that nice little line of quads. That if you had me last quarter, I did this demo like many times for punching holes and stuff. But again, nice line of quads to just sort of help harden that edge. I'll hit G to extrude one more time. I'll just push those down a little bit, and you can see that now I have nice looking holes punched in my mesh. So I just go ahead and extrude again. And this is just me like adding edge loops as I go because I don't like doing multiple steps. So I'm just sort of extruding, pushing in, and again, you can see I'm just adding those edge loops with multiple extrudes as I go. And I will extrude one more time, scale those all the way the heck down, and then I'm just going to grab those vertices and, oh, I see, now you work with symmetry. That makes no sense. I'm going to take these and just merge them to center to actually close up the holes on the inside of here. And then again, you have like weird little holes punched into your sword. Any questions about that? All right. So in this case, just like as a general like good housekeeping thing, having, I mean, and you can see it's actually like is affecting the outer edge of this little circle right here. But like when I toggle between unsmoothed and smoothed, you can see that these lines are like getting stretched really, really far up. This will cause some like bizarre texture stretching and stuff. So what I would usually recommend to fix that is pretty much what I've been saying repeatedly for the rest of class, which is just like a few more edge loops. So I'll just throw in maybe a loop here. And then some people actually like to have like pretty regular edge loops just going up the whole thing. So they'll just sort of like add more than they need. Again, this is like personal preference, but well, I say more than they need, but it does help reduce texture stretching, and if you're sculpting this, it will help keep your mesh a little bit more organized in terms of mesh resolution. So it's not like a horrible thing to do. I just usually don't do it. Again, personal preference. I like as few edge loops as possible because that just makes my life easier. But if I just throw those edge loops in there, you'll notice that any of that like weird pulling that was happening before, and any of that like crazy stretching isn't really happening. So, you know, if I toggle between smooth and unsmooth, you can see that like that edge loop is no longer stretching all the way up to here. So that's like more or less how I'd make the general shape of that sword. And honestly, the worst part about making smoothed weapons is I think getting the blade to be like pointed correctly, and everything after that is kind of just like basic shaping. So are there any questions about like anything that I did for this, or?
Well, no, not in particular, but like,
Cool.
what would be a good way to use the Boolean theorem?
Define good way. I mean, I use it absolutely shamelessly for 3D printing and a bunch of other things. So I am like, if you're doing game meshes, I totally don't care about booleaning at all because like the fix is pretty much just like auto triangulate your mesh, which is what the game engine's doing anyway. Usually my shtick with booleaning is it's like the last thing that I do to my mesh. Just because if I need to like select this edge loop for some reason, The second that it's, you know, booleaned and triangulated all crazy, it gets really like almost impossible to go through and like select edge loops, especially if it's like a complicated boolean. But like I'll totally, like, I use booleans to punch holes and stuff all the time. I actually use booleans. Here's my convoluted thing for like if I want to slice this mesh up. So like if I need to 3D print a human-sized sword on a printer that only does 12-inch segments, I'd just be like, hey, I'm gonna boolean this like a maniac. So like, I think I'm just gonna chop it apart here. I'm gonna basically make two little boxes that kind of line up. So I just duplicated that plane, and I'm extruding that plane, so now I have two awkward boxes. As you guys will notice, so if I, normal direction is important when you boolean stuff. So I'm gonna, you know, grab this and do, add a mesh reverse on it. And then, what am I doing right now? Sorry, buttons. All right, so I'm just gonna duplicate my little sword so I have two pieces, because I'm basically gonna take one, chop off the bottom half, and then take the other one, chop off the top half. So I'll just grab one of those swords, grab my top thing, do mesh boolean difference, and you can see that it's cut off just the bottom part of that sword. And then for this guy, I'll pretty much do the same thing, but in reverse. Oop. What are you doing? Cool. So now I have basically two pieces of sword. What are you doing to me? So now I have like two weird pieces of sword, which I could go and chop up on my 3D printer and like actually print. So I use booleans a lot for this, for like, you know, just cutting up meshes, shamelessly for punching holes in things, shamelessly for tacking details onto things, just not for smooth models. So a lot of times, like, one thing that I'll actually do, which is super weird, wait for it. So there's a sword that I made. Where is it? This dude. So like I made this for a client. It takes forever to load. But I actually so I started out pretty much doing what I did here, where I started out with like a low poly mesh, just starting out with a plane for these gray areas, then I like pushed the little blade parts out. And then all of these I just shamelessly made clip through each other. I'm just like, cool, like, wow, hello. I was like, this squiggle is clipping, this is like a separate squiggle, and in the end I just sort of boolean everything together. Because again, I'm not smoothing this. This is actually the low resolution version of this mesh. So like if you're just working with like really dense geometry or anything you're not smoothing, as far as I'm concerned, shamelessly use booleans. Just be aware that they can like make your life harder to work with. So like the last step I ever do on a project is like booleaning everything together. Because people in the 3D printing world get all hissy if you send them a model with multiple parts. They're like, it needs to be booleaned. And I'm like, it'll print if you don't boolean it. Anyway, it's one of my weird peeps. But yeah, and then like pretty much everything I did is like just some variation of like what I showed you before. So like these little squiggles, I pretty much blocked them in with planes. And then I just went through and like sort of said, all right, this looks like, I kind of like wove the planes together a little bit. Like, you know, just made this side come up. When I was done happy with the shape and how they interacted with each other, I just extruded them straight down and clipped them through the sword, and you can see that like here's the inside of all my squiggles. So a lot of making blades is like honestly kind of repetitive and like hands down the worst part of this, because I knew it was easy to block out the shape in low poly, but then when I went to move to high poly, like if you're gonna print this thing at 4 feet tall or whatever, unless you have a crap ton of a lot of geometry, you will see all of the polygons in the printed thing, which like people don't like. So I did actually have to go in and like subdivide my mesh. So I modeled this low poly, and then you can kind of see where I like added in my edge loops to harden all my edges, and then I just subdivided it like 7 times. It was awful. But yeah, so I don't know. Hopefully that did that kind of answer your question about booleaning like at all? Yeah.
What's going on in that like cylinder at the top? There's like a lot of.
Wait. This thing? Oh, this is just like a weird eyeball I made for it. So I had the idea of, instead of just printing an eye and like painting an eye, I was like, what if So I was like, what if I made a thing and like cast it in resin? So I made like a 3-part eye where like you'd have this, you can sort of see that like lumpy blue part in here. that would be something that you would like 3D print and paint. And then I basically made a reverse mold of this eyeball itself, or like that curved dome, with the thought being that I could fill that with resin and then implant that blue thing in it, and then I would have like a cool looking, more realistic eyeball that I could then glue onto the sword. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And 3D printing sucks because you have to deal with like tolerances and all that stuff, but yeah. So that's, I mean, that was like kind of, I guess, a simplistic weapon to do, but does anyone have any questions about like how to model other blade things or like any kind of weapon stuff? All right. So just again, if you guys are doing weapons for your finals or for like whatever, if you give it to me to look at it, there's like a few things, because I model a lot of weapons for stuff. There's like a few specific things that I look at, and it's usually if the model is smooth, like how well does this blade edge hold up, and then how do you deal with this little area like up here, and how that comes together. So like one thing for this you might consider, which again I have no idea if this makes sense at all in terms of the actual weapon, but one thing that I could do is like deform this with a non-linear. This is one of the weird times that I use flare deformers. So like if I wanted, I want the whole thing, and you can totally use a lattice deformer for this, it's honestly kind of the same thing, but if I just want the whole thing to become gradually narrower at the top, I'll usually model it flat, pretty much like what I have, and then, nope. All right, and then I'll just like, pretty much like flare it in towards itself, if that makes sense. So basically just like crushing the top down, so that the whole thing is becoming uniformly, narrower as you get towards the top. Which is like, again, kind of one way you can compensate if you like can't figure out what the heck is happening or like how to deal with this edge up here, because honestly, I can't tell from the picture what that's doing. That like doesn't make sense to me. But one thing I do find is like usually kind of like weird looking would be to just like take this, and now component mode is working because it hates me. No. Oh, I set it to component again. All right. One thing I usually do find kind of awkward, just like personally, is if you like crush those vertices down, because it'll make like sort of a weird line here, which like if your sword does that, fine. If it doesn't do that, sometimes it looks kind of weird. But yeah, so I mean that's just like stuff that I personally look for, like if I'm grading you on your weapons or whatever. It's like things that I usually look for because I make a lot of weapons. Yeah. So any other questions on weapons? Do you guys want to see anything else with these, or kind of good?